Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. We're here with Post-Gazette Live. I'm Paul Zeise for the daily 5 o'clock edition of the Post-Gazette Live. We will, as always, try and cover a lot of ground as we usually do. Clearly, the story of the day has been George Pickens, and of course, if you think about what George Pickens has done, here's what I'm going to tell you. First of all, in my mailbag, I had people asking me, do I think the Steelers should move on from George Pickens? And the answer is no, they shouldn't. I mean, I'm sorry, but George Pickens is way too good. He's way too talented. He's got way too many tools. You don't move on from a guy like that. You just don't. You hope that Mike Tomlin can kind of reel him in a little bit. I think the thing about it is Mike Tomlin even said it after last week's game. He's got to grow up. Just grow up a little bit. Like I always say, and this is what I would ask every one of these athletes that continually, finds ways to get penalties or, whatever because they want to dance or they want to, taunt or they want to do, whatever. Well, they're an emotional player. You know what? The whole league is full of emotional players that don't get stupid penalties. But here's what I would say. How does that help you become a better football player, and how does that help the Steelers win? And if the answer is it doesn't and it doesn't, which it doesn't and it doesn't, then knock it off. But that's different. To me, that's different. The issue is so many ways. The issue to me is that basically, he's too good of a player to be caught up in that kind of nonsense. And I think that he's also too good of a player to sit here and talk about, well, maybe the Steelers ought to think about moving on from him or whatever the story is. No. He's a really talented guy. He's a guy that can help you win games. He's a guy that can do a lot of things that a lot of guys in the NFL cannot do. So to me, you don't move on from him. You don't talk about moving on from him. You figure out a way to get him to grow up a little bit. That's all you do. And then from there, you go forward with him and you say, listen, George, we want you to be, one of the premier receivers in the NFL. And we think you can be that guy. But let's focus more on just being a great football player. Stop with all the nonsense, the taunting that you do and some of the, the silly stuff you do after a play. It's great that you're emotional. Control your emotions and don't put yourself in bad situations. And I think that's the important thing. And it's just one of this thing. It's one of these things where I would tell you he really needs to figure that out. He needs to figure out what it is he's going to be. And if he wants to be a superstar, which I think he does, then he'll focus on football and he'll get better at the areas he needs to get better at. And he'll be able then to, become the player that they need him to be. He's clearly one of the most talented players in the NFL. He's one of the most talented receivers in the NFL. He's clearly one of the guys who I think if you look up and down the league, most teams would love to have him. And it's really important for that. It's really important for the Steelers that happens. It is kind of hilarious to me. He's gotten into this little war of the words with the Browns. Did you see this? He says basically, he said, if you remember after they played the Browns, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, even though they had beaten the Steelers, George Pickens said that, the Browns are not a good team. And then he was asked about it again today, and he said, hey, I just go by the record. In other words, they stink. Then, of course, cornerback Greg Newsome from the Browns basically had the fight or whatever it was at the end of the game, if you remember that. They asked him about that today, and he said, basically, I don't even know who that guy is. I think it's hilarious. I don't mind a little bit of back and forth, talking a little trash between the games. You want to do that during the week, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with a little bit of emotion. I don't have a problem even with, some of the stuff that these young guys do. I don't have a problem with it until you start getting penalized for it, until it starts taking away from the team. Then I've got a problem with it. Then I've got a real problem with it. And I think that's the key, really. Newsome was asked about this whole thing, by the way. He said, I'm all about the team. Obviously, Pickens is a guy that cares more about himself. You see that in the penalties that he causes. For me, my job is to do whatever I can do to help the team win. There's never going to be no one-on-one battle for me. My battle is for me to help my team get the win. The only way you take something that someone says is disrespectful is if you actually care about that person. I don't care what he says or anybody has to say, so I don't take that as disrespectful because I don't care about that dude at all. I'm an ultimate professional, so it's easy for me. A guy like him, it's obviously hard. That fight happened in our game. He got 2 more penalties the next game. That's just a trend that he does. It's one of those things where I feel like George Pickens, I don't have a problem. See, here's the thing. It's just like Antonio Brown. I didn't have a problem with some of the stuff Antonio Brown did. I didn't have a problem with some of his antics in between games. I thought he always played hard. And I think he always played hard. And I think that George Pickens always plays hard. I think George Pickens plays to win. And I think that's important. I think it's important when you got winning players like that. What you've got to do is figure out a way to rein in some of the silly stuff. And that's what I would tell you. Pickens, to me, is a guy that you just kind of need to rein it in a little bit. You need to figure out a way to harness all of that stuff. You need to figure out a way to get him to a point where, you know what, his focus is mainly on making big plays in the football game. Because, again, he is the only guy you have that is truly a difference maker. And I'm not disparaging any of the other guys. I think Pat Freiermuth, I think, is a really good football player. Okay. I think Najee Harris and Jalen Warren are good running backs. I think, Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin are reasonably good complementary receivers. But the only guy you have that's a difference maker, that's a high-impact, change-the-game kind of player is George Pickens. And so you need George Pickens really to get to a point where he's making play after play after play after play. That's what you need to do. And I think that's where he's at right now. You've got to get to a point where he is your playmaker. He is the focus of your offense. And when you do that, if he gets to a point where he stops some of the silliness and he stops, causing issues and he stops getting, tied up in these nonsensical things, if you're able to do that and harness that, then you're going to have a really, really good football player who is a guy who for the next 5, 6, 8 years is going to be one of the best receivers in football. So to me, George Pickens, the discussion should never be about, maybe they should trade him or move on from him. No. You shouldn't move on from George Pickens. You shouldn't trade George Pickens. George Pickens is way too good of a football player for you to do that. He just is. And I think that really you just want him to sort of tone it down a little bit. Just tone it down a little bit. Not even a lot. You can still do some of your dances and some of your celebrations and all the other stuff. But you know what? Make sure that you're not getting penalties. Make sure that you're not getting penalties. Make sure that you're not hurting your team. And I think that's where it is. That's what it is when I think of George Pickens. Don't really, feed into some of the other stuff. And here's the thing. There's no question that referees are probably looking for him now and looking at him now. Just like Joey Porter with some of his stuff grabbing, the hand stuff. Referees are probably looking for that a little bit more. Maybe it's not fair, but you got to understand that. And so it just seems to me, George Pickens, ask yourself after you make a tackle, after you make a catch, and, it's a big catch at a big point in the game, ask yourself if doing your little dance routine or whatever you're going to do, does that help your team win? Does that help you as a player? Does that help you? Hang on one second. I'm trying to. Sorry about that. All right. I had to plug in. I was getting ready to lose my power. Can't lose power. Does that make you a better football player? Does doing this really, do you need to do that to be a great football player? I'm just saying, things that are going to maybe get yourself into a bind, it doesn't seem really to make a lot of sense to me. It really doesn't. That you are out there doing that when you're a really good football player. You don't need to do that. And so I feel like, to me, George Pickens is, when it came to Antonio Brown, it was the same kind of thing, I think, right? Wasn't it? Same kind of thing. Why do it? What's the point of doing it? And I would tell you that, what? It's going to be very, very interesting to see how he matures, how he comes along, how he grows into his role. By the way, the game's always on at Archie's. Get down to Archie's on Carson Street, home of the 80-cent wings Monday through Thursday. Carson Street on South Side, obviously. They have all the games on Sundays. They have all the games on Saturdays. Get down to Archie's, and when you get there, tell them Paul Zeise sent you. I usually get down there for Monday Night Football, so if you want to come down and watch a little football, have some wings, Monday's a good time to come and say hello. You can also eat my grilled cheese sandwich. Now on to the Browns. The Browns, to me, are going to go down this year as a case study in how, if you have a bad quarterback situation, it can tear your entire team apart. It can tear your entire team apart. And the bottom line is, when we write the obituary of the Browns this year, when we look at their season this year and we try and figure out what happened, that's going to be the biggest thing. The biggest thing is going to be, we're going to talk about the fact that they bet on the wrong quarterback a couple of years ago, or was it last year or 2 years ago? They bet on the wrong quarterback, and it has really, really ruined their team. Because honestly, I still think the Browns have a pretty good roster. I don't think they should be as bad as they are. But they wasted a lot of games. What was it, 8 or 10 games with Deshaun Watson as the quarterback? And, when you look at where they're at, I mean, their offense is not ranked very highly, even though Jameis Winston has put up some points in recent weeks. I mean, they are, let's see where they're at. 4th from the bottom in terms of scoring points. 18.2 points per game is what they're scoring. The only teams that are worse are the Giants, the Panthers, and the Patriots. Now, I'd be willing to bet, if you look at the last few weeks, it's probably been more than 18 points since Jameis Winston really took over. I mean, do we want to do some quick math in our heads? 32 and 24 is what? 56, right? Then they had 70, 80, and then 29 is what? 109, and that's 5 games. So what's that? 21 and a half points. So they've been basically the last 5 weeks, they've been 3.5 points better than what they've averaged for the entire season. Not great, but not horrible either. So what I'm telling you is, I think it's important to note that they are basically a case study in what happens when you have a bad quarterback. What happens when you back the wrong quarterback and your team's falling apart. The defense, I think, is better than it should be. I mean, it hasn't played as well. If you look at the all of the parts that they have, they should be better than they are. If you look at, the defense, if you look at even the running game, the offensive line, I know they've had some injuries, but the Browns should be better than they are. When the Steelers played them the first time, you know what? The Steelers had plenty of opportunities to win. By the same token, they didn't take advantage of those things. And somehow, some way, they lost to Jameis Winston, and he didn't even throw a touchdown pass in that game. I know there were some people that thought that Russell Wilson didn't play great in that game. I don't agree with that. I thought he played fine. I thought he was good. I thought he was fine in that game. I just think that when you look at it from that perspective, it's really, really going to be interesting to see how the Browns come out this week against the Steelers. A, I think the Steelers are really motivated to win. B, I think they need to win. And C, you know what? I think that they understand that Jameis Winston is going to throw them the ball a few times. And if he throws them the ball a few times, they're going to win, probably going away. That's my prediction. So, on top of everything else that has happened, I think it is really, really important to note that the Steelers owe the Browns. And the Steelers also understand what it's going to do, what it's going to do, what it's going to take to beat them, which is probably containing Jameis Winston a little bit or whatever, whatever you want to say that is. I just think that really he's going to throw some interceptions and he's going to throw the ball to them a few times. And I think that that's probably going to be the difference in the game. So I'm not sure where it is, but it's going to be a great story for the Steelers, because if they win it, they get to 10-3. I mean, 9-3. If they get to 9-3, at that point, now all of a sudden, if you look at the standings, and this is why it's important for them to win. If they win, okay, and they get to 9-3, that means the worst they can finish, no matter what happens, is 9-8. I'm sorry, they're already 9-3. I'm looking at the wrong standings here. They're 9-3 already. This is what I was getting at. If they win, they're 10-3. That means the worst they can finish is 10-7. If you look at the Colts and the Dolphins, where they're at right now, both of them have 7 losses already. Okay? The Colts this week are at the Broncos. Actually, they're off this week, and then they're at the Broncos next week. So there's that. And the Steelers, so that means the Steelers can't, I guess, officially clinch a playoff spot with a win, because the Colts, remember, beat them and have the tiebreaker. But the Dolphins play the Jets. If the Dolphins were to lose, basically, and the Steelers were to win, it's almost a lock that the Steelers are going to make the playoffs. That's what I would tell you. I just think it's important that they win, get this game going, and basically, if they get further and further and further and further ahead, then they might be able to get to a point where maybe they can rest a few guys. And it's going to be important, if they rest a few guys and get themselves healthy. I mean, I think one of the things that was great about this week is if you look at their injury report, there's nobody on it. They're a really healthy football team right now. And so winning this week gives them a lot of, basically, I guess they can't technically clinch a playoff spot because the Colts don't play. So, technically, I guess the Colts could finish 10-7. They could finish 10-7. And okay, good. But it virtually is a lock if they win this week that they're going to be in the playoffs. So that's the good thing. I think that's what's on the line for this week. As I said before, the game's always on at Archie's. Get down to Archie's on Carson Street. Archie's the home of 80-cent wings Monday through Thursday, home of the Paul Zeise grilled cheese sandwich. Get down there. When you get down there, tell them Paul Zeise sent you. Now, a couple of other developments in the world of college football right now, and that is tomorrow we've got Championship Saturday. And I'll be honest with you, what's ridiculous about Championship Saturday is there's not a lot of drama. Oregon and Penn State, doesn't matter who wins and who loses, they're both going to be in. Georgia and Texas, doesn't matter who wins and loses, they're both going to be in. I suppose Arizona State and Iowa State, the winner goes and the loser doesn't, so that game will be interesting. Clemson SMU is interesting because Clemson wins, I think they're both going to be in. If Clemson loses, I think SMU and Miami will be in. So, there's a little intrigue there. But for the most part, these games are anticlimactic. What's good, though, is if Penn State were to win the game over Oregon and Texas were to lose, I think you can make a really strong case that Penn State will be the number one overall seed. And either way, they're going to get a home game in the playoffs. And the other part of it is it'd be the second Big Ten championship for James Franklin. So for all the discussion about what he can't do and how he doesn't win and all that other stuff, you know what? It'd be two Big Ten championships for him. It'd be his first trip into the playoffs. He'd get a playoff. He's got he would have a playoff game on his home field, presumably against somebody they'd be favored against. So you know what? There's a lot on the line for Penn State tomorrow. The system is stupid, though. It's absolutely stupid. I mean, these games, the only thing that should matter in these games is if you win, you get the automatic bid. But losing shouldn't hurt any of these teams. Shouldn't count as a loss because it's an extra game. And I think that that's one of the flaws in the system. The other flaw is the way that they manipulate it to try and make sure that all the SEC teams, have the best chance to get to the playoffs because they want 4 or 5 of those teams in the playoffs. That's just silly. On the flip side of it, if you look at basketball, remember last year and the year before, the ACC coaches whining and crying because they didn't have all the respect that they needed come NCAA tournament time. And one of the things I said then and one of the things I'll say now is just win basketball games. If you win basketball games in the preseason, then nothing matters because you will have won and you will have the metrics that you need to prove that your league is tough. If you saw what happened this week in the SEC-ACC Challenge, the SEC killed them. There's no discussion right now in my mind. I mean, the ACC, if they get 4 bids or 3 bids, that's what they deserve. They've gotten killed. They have not been good against the other Power 5 conferences. I think I saw a stat at something like some ridiculous number, like they're like 8-40 or something against the other Power 5 teams or something. The other Power 5, Power 4 conferences. That's not going to get it done. The flip side, in football, the SEC wants it the other way. They want to have it their own way. They want to make football. The results don't have to matter. They want to basically just be able to say, listen, this team is better than that team because, well, we said so, or because the Vegas odds said so. Meanwhile, the SEC, like, for instance, Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin's doing a lot of crying. You know what? If you want to be in the playoff, don't lose to LSU, who, by the way, lost to USC. Don't lose to Kentucky, who, by the way, got smoked by Louisville. And don't lose to Florida, who, by the way, got smoked by Miami. So, to me, one of the things that's dumb about college sports, it's still, to me, the dumbest thing is all these metrics they try and use to try and fill these playoffs and all that other stuff. It's not really the right way to go about doing business. It just isn't. It feels like it's just sort of, you're trying to manipulate the matchups, and I get it. There's a TV element to it. There's an audience element to it. There's a selling tickets element to it. To me, it's good that they're going to play some of these games on home fields. But when I hear that they're going to play like at Boise or at like UNLV or one of these teams is going to get like a home game, I think it's silly. All of these games should take place in big stadiums where they can, maximize the revenue that they're going to get. Because believe me, they're going to need to. So the game, again, the only game tomorrow that really, really is intriguing is Iowa State against Arizona State, the Big 12 game. I have no idea how good either of those teams are. I haven't really seen either of those teams play, but I'm intrigued. But the other part of it is it's probably the one game where it's a true win and you're in, lose, go home situation. I guess, one or two, maybe one of those group of five games, maybe the game involving UNLV or the game involving Boise. I forget which one it is. One of those games is similar where the winner has a chance to go. But the reality is the only true playoff game tomorrow is the Big 12 game. And that's because, again, you have Arizona State and Iowa State. Winner goes, loser goes home. Couple other notes to kick around real quick before we get out of here and get into their weekend is Rich Rodriguez. Do you remember Rich Rodriguez? He was one game away from the national championship game in 2007, and I still maintain, had they beaten Pitt on that last game of the year, had they beaten Pitt, gotten to the Fiesta Bowl or whatever it was and played against Ohio State, they would have beaten Ohio State. And they would have won because that Ohio State team wasn't very good, and they got destroyed by, who was it? LSU, I think, destroyed them. 2-loss LSU. Anyway, Rich Rodriguez lost that game to Pitt, the 13-9 game, very famous game. Everyone remembers it. Dave Wannstedt on crutches, Mike McGlynn telling ESPN guys, eat crow and all that other stuff. Pat Bostic, the least athletic quarterback sneak I've ever seen. Pat Bostic won the game, quote unquote, won the game. I think he actually made like 2 passes in that game. LaShawn McCoy putting the team on his back, the whole 9 yards, the Big East refs trying to steal it. That game. After that game, Rich Rodriguez, if you remember, got it in his feelings because he, was some criticism from some of the people above him and all that other stuff. And so then he took the job at Michigan. It was a bitter divorce. There was death threats against him and his wife and his kids and all that stuff. It turned out to be a bad decision by him. He went from there to Arizona State to, he bounced around a little bit more than Arizona. There to Arizona, and then bounced around a little bit and ended up at Jackson State, which, by the way, his team plays tonight. And he's also going to, he was basically persona non grata. He was basically a guy who was, not ever going to be allowed back in West Virginia. I mean, he went from being a guy who could have run for governor, when he was the coach and they were that close to winning national championships. He could have run for governor of that state and would have won, to a guy who basically was like, don't come back here. But now West Virginia has an opening, and guess what? Rich Rodriguez is going to interview for the job. Here's what I'm going to tell you. West Virginia would be foolish not to hire him. There's 2 guys that they should try and hire. And if one of them says yes, they should hire them. Rich Rodriguez is one, because he's a really good football coach, and I think he's a good fit at West Virginia. I think he would do a really good job there. He wasn't a good fit at Michigan. The Arizona thing is it just that wasn't a good situation for a lot of reasons. I think at West Virginia, he's a perfect fit. He obviously, we know his story, grew up in Grant Town, right down the street from Morgantown, all of that. I think he's a guy that would be there and he'd retire there. And, it would be a great story. But more importantly, he's a great coach. The other guy is obviously Jimbo Fisher. Say whatever you want to say about Jimbo Fisher, and I know there's a lot you want to say. But, the reality is he won a national title. He was in the playoff when it was still a 14 playoff. He was in the playoff a second year. And he also has a really good record. I mean, the people at Texas A&M were nuts, and the expectations were way too high. But the reality is, if you look at Jimbo Fisher, he's 59 years old. He's got roots, obviously, in West Virginia. He was born in Clarksburg, okay? Born in Clarksburg, and, of course, he has roots there and everything else. If you look at where he's at, okay, and look at what he's doing, his record is 128-48. He's 8-2 in bowl games. So, you know what? He's done a pretty good job. He's won three ACC titles, a national championship. He won 4 Atlantic Division titles. And the Atlantic Division is where Clemson and Louisville were, so it was tough for the 2 divisions. All I'm trying to say is, whatever you think about Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M, boy, if you're West Virginia, you need to go hire him or you need to hire Rich Rodriguez. And if you do that, it'll be a home run hire. Don't overthink this thing. Don't try and reinvent the wheel. Don't come up with another Neil Brown type. Go get one of these two guys. If one of them says yes, you'd be a fool not to hire them. We'll do it again after the game Sunday. Until then, really enjoy chatting with you every day. Until then, have a good weekend and stay out of trouble. Stay warm as well.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.